confidence really is so integral to what we do, and it's probably the reason why so many people don't teach pronunciation explicitly.
I mean, as Robin Walker says, pronunciation is the beating heart of language, and without it, nothing can go right.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first PronSIG podcast episode. This is our pilot episode, and we're very excited to talk to you today about pronunciation and teaching in general. My name's Mike Budden, and I will be the host of the episode, and I've got two exciting guests for us today to ask some questions and get their input on a couple of important topics. So firstly, we have Gemma Archer. Gemma is an EAP teacher and program coordinator at the ELT unit at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. She is also a pronunciation specialist, materials writer, teacher trainer, and joint coordinator of the IATEFL Pronunciation Special Interest Group, PronSIG. And she's also the outgoing editor of the SIG's, the Special Interest Group's biannual journal Speak Out. She's the co-author of Teaching English Pronunciation for a Global World. And her research interests lie in the field of pronunciation pedagogy and accent, and the issues which can arise when students and teachers of English are confronted with diverse regional and global varieties of English. And the second speaker that we have today is Adam Scott. Adam is an experienced ELT teacher, teacher trainer, writer, and teacher researcher passionate about critical and translingual practices. Adam is education director at Sensations English and IATEFL PronSIG joint coordinator. Informed by a Master of TESOL and a first degree in philosophy, critical theory and social change, his interests include pronunciation, authentic communication, and challenging native speaker bias. Wow, fantastic. All right. Gemma, I might start with you, if that's okay. So first question I've got for you today is when did you begin to get interested in pronunciation teaching? How did all that come about?
Quite late in my teaching career, I would say. I was about 8 or 9 years into teaching before I stumbled upon pronunciation teaching. And a lot of that is because simply I got next to no training in pronunciation when I first started off, when I did my CELTA certificate in teaching English. And I just kind of stumbled through these little, the little short boxes that you get in textbooks on pronunciation. And I stumbled through those little kind of exercises, usually doing it all wrong because it never matched my accent. It was always in a kind of standard Southern British English accent. And I embarrassed myself so many times that I just stopped even attempting to teach pronunciation. And I was really scared that students would ever ask me questions about it. So I really had a very different relationship with it at the beginning of my career for the first kind of 8 years or so. Then when I went on to do my diploma, my DIP TESOL, and that has a pronunciation, a phonology component to it. You have to do a phonology oral exam. You have to do various written papers. And that's when I started to really get a taste for it, but get particularly incensed because, again, so much of it was only available or only transcribed or only described standard Southern British English. So it felt like having to learn another language. I was having to learn phonology in a language and a sound system that was not my own, which made it so much more complicated. And I just got very incensed by this. And it kind of just started the ball rolling of me trying to learn more, trying to feel more confident, less terrified. And it kind of snowballed from there.
What pronunciation were your students working towards? Were they grateful that you were showing them the Southern Standard British pronunciation, or were they more interested in your Scottish pronunciation, or both?
So early in my career, I was working mainly in Scotland, but I started off in Italy. I did a little bit in Ireland as well. I don't even remember it coming up. It came up I think when I was abroad, I think students just assumed that I had that accent because they couldn't tell the difference. And then at home, people did ask about it, but it never seemed to get much discussion. Nowadays, that's different because, it comes into every class and every lesson. And so students learn that this is a normal thing to talk about. But because I didn't even touch pronunciation at the time, and it was just kind of at the lexical level, we talk about, Scottish English or Scots or the language that students were hearing all around them. It wasn't really pronunciation specific. So I'm not actually sure about the answer to that question.
Interesting. Okay, Adam, what about you? How did you get into pronunciation teaching?
Wow. So I think it really came about when I took over a beginner class at the school I was teaching in Brighton, which had been really struggling to make any progress. And a Canadian teacher colleague said, I've been using this phonics stuff with them. And I'd been doing some lexical research before that into teaching and getting involved in that, and thought that was my area. When I got into this phonics stuff, it was really kind of mind-blowing. It suddenly opened up a huge area of teaching which had just been ignored, really, and I found absolutely fascinating. We've got a real interesting situation here down in Brighton where local people, especially younger people, don't really articulate very well and just speak with the very front of their mouth, sort of thing, and anything back from the alveolar ridge doesn't really come into it. And so that's really challenging for learners as well, especially when, you think about listening being one of the key inputs for people who are really developing language use independently. And so that's where it all began for me. And I got very, very excited and very involved in it all. I'd also kind of come back from teaching abroad, having lost my accent through a kind of a process of kind of assimilation in the Czech culture, and people couldn't work out where I was from anymore. So that was a real interesting kind of perspective to have on things, that kind of them accent varied much more than it had before, depending on the situation I was in. So all of those things came together.
So you mentioned phonics teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested to dig a little deeper there. Firstly, what is phonics? Secondly, isn't that mostly for L1 reading instruction?
So that's where it's come from. And phonics is a way of mapping the phonemes that occur in speech sound to the graphemes, or the letters which correspond to a particular sound. Some people say that, English is not a phonetic language, but if it's an alphabetic language, it has to be a phonetic language, whether the code for that match between spelling and sound is clear and shallow, as it is with something like Spanish, or deep or opaque, as it is with English or with Danish, for example. If you don't take a phonetic kind or phonological kind of like approach to it all, then you're effectively asking people to sight read words, and then you get into a weird situation where in ideographic languages like Chinese or Japanese, you've got a memory of about 1,800 to 2,000 images that you can store as vocabulary, and that then creates an issue with kind of like the reading speed and the kind of fluency of people and their ability to express themselves. So yeah, it's all very kind of wrapped up in lots of different things about how sound and meaning are stored in the brain and processed, as well as kind of how we teach any of that to students.
Do you do phonics teaching for adults as well, for adult students?
So I spent about 4 years doing classroom research on that, and developed an incidental approach to synthetic phonics rather than a structured one, which is what happens with teaching reading and writing. And the key thing with phonics is that it is a reversible system. It applies as equally and works as well for encoding from sound to speech as it does from decoding from speech to sound. And that's kind of what they say proves that it's not made up, that it works both ways. And just recently I got back from a teaching trip abroad, and the phonics system had been introduced in that learning context about 5 years ago, and the teachers were remarking at the massive improvement that they had seen in students' use of English pronunciation since that was introduced. And I think it's such a powerful tool. So, and when I've been sharing it with students, and their usual response is, well, this is so easy, why aren't we using this? Which is always a good encouragement when you're going against the status quo and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Fantastic. Really, really interesting topic, that one. Okay, Gemma, I might come back to you. And of course, this is a PronSIG podcast. We're making it for the PronSIG community, and you both are joint coordinators of PronSIG. So why did you decide to join PronSIG initially?
So I think, again, it came back to my developing interest in pronunciation. I was very thirsty to learn more, and to hear from other people, learn from other people. I stumbled across IATEFL really, again, years after I began teaching. I don't know how I managed to miss all these teaching organisations, but when I finally found it, and found PronSIG, I was so excited to finally have somewhere that I could go to learn more, to hear from experts. And I joined in, I think it was 2015, 2016, went to my first conference. And it was just finally to have somewhere to get questions answered, to learn all of these gaps in my knowledge that I was suddenly able to start filling. It's really geeky, but I totally just loved that aspect of it because it was giving me something I couldn't find anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And then a year after I joined, actually I was in my spam email folder. And I found this email from Wayne Rimmer, who was the PronSIG coordinator at that time, inviting people to apply for a place in the committee, the PronSIG committee. And I was in my spam folder, and the deadline was that day. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder if I should maybe, apply to be on the committee, and again, that kind of professional development angle, thinking, this could really maximize my exposure to pronunciation and learning, and get more contact with all of these experts. So I applied right at the last minute, and happily was successful. But I think what's really interesting to think back on that now, speaking to those people who were on the committee at the time, thinking, Robin Walker and Wayne Rimmer and so on. I don't know if you know this, Adam, but they'd actually had a discussion the previous year, and they're like, yeah, this committee is just, it's ending up that it's all male, almost all male, and almost entirely white men. So we really need a little bit more broader perspective within the committee. Let's open the committee up. Let's open it up for applications. And so when I came on board, I also joined a little bit after people like Louise Guyette and Katerina Ponches, Laura Patsko. And I think that was a real turning point in this latter part of the PronSIG committee history, because I think from that point onwards, the committee really grew. And Adam and I came on as joint coordinators in 2020 as well. So and the rest is history, as they say.
So how would you, Gemma, describe the PronSIG community in terms of how it's helped you and how it could help other people?
That's such a good question. And I think for me personally, if I'm just focusing on myself and nothing more, it's the opportunities that come from being part of a teaching organisation. Over the last couple of years, we have put together a text. We've written a text collaboratively within the committee based on a piece of member research that we did in 2023, asking people about their experiences of being part of a teachers' organisation. And I can only kind of really relate to the findings that we've had from members, is that there's a range of things that you can take from your membership. You don't have to be involved in everything and come to every event. I do because I love it. But you don't have to be totally involved in every single element and all the time. You can, just come to a couple of webinars or maybe just read the journal. But I think the main thing for me is there is opportunity if you're willing to engage with us. And it's there for the taking. We want people to contact us. We want to grow the community. We want to reach out to teachers because we know how it feels to be right there at the beginning of your career when you maybe don't feel so confident about teaching pronunciation, don't know exactly which direction to go in. And we want to say, hey, we've been there. Why don't you come along, chat with us? And there's a great amount of networking, friendships being developed, lots of recommendations. It's just so fulfilling. But coming back to, you can take from your membership what you wish. If you just want a hands-off approach, just to watch a couple of webinars or read some research, you'll get that. But if you want more, the opportunities are there. And I think that's certainly what Adam and I have really benefited from. The opportunities, the contacts, but also the friendships. It's just been such a positive experience.
Mm-hmm. I can reflect on my experiences. Earlier when I was just teaching in Berlin, I really felt like there was a bit of a network in Berlin. But upon returning back to Germany after a while being away and entering PronSIG, suddenly my community was quite international. And just felt really amazing to connect with everybody all over the continent of Europe and even further at the PronSIG events and things like that. So it's definitely been quite enriching for me. So I can support what you've said there for sure.
Great.
What about you, Adam? How did you get interested in PronSIG and become interested in becoming joint coordinator?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like Gemma. I didn't really discover IATEFL until suddenly one day in our teachers' meeting, the principal said, "And IATEFL the conference is next week in Brighton." I thought, okay, well, why don't we know about it? And what is this thing? And then from there, got involved, and I was like, right, I'm definitely going next year. And that was my introduction, really, going to the conference and finding out what was happening through that, joining because you need to join in order to speak. And that first year I chose ReSIG as my SIG and went to their PCE, which is the pre-conference event the day before the conference. And then just while I was at the conference, met other people, met some pronunciation people, and it was just clearly a nice community to be a part of. So then the following year, I was doing more pronunciation related stuff, and I jumped ship to PronSIG and just sat there quietly, like as Gemma says, going to the odd webinar and attending the events, the face-to-face annual conferences for PronSIG, which used to happen before the pandemic. And through that, got to know people like that Gemma's mentioned, like Louise and Laura and Robin and Wayne. And then was asked if I would like to join the committee and join as joint coordinator. And as it was Gemma who was the other person who was going to be coordinator, I thought, yeah, that sounds like a really good kind of combination. And we had a great chat, worked out what we stood for, and all of this, the alignment that we had together really meant that we could build what we built. So yeah, it's been really fun.
And it's called the Pronunciation Special Interest Group, of course, but it's not just pronunciation, is it, Adam? There's a lot of listening and decoding and things like that are discussed at these talks as well, right?
I mean, as Robin Walker says, 4 skills, and it really links into the grammatical forms and the structure of vocabulary just as much as it does with the actual act of speaking. So, yeah.
I remember at that conference, we had Adam was talking about pronunciation and writing, focusing on phonics and spelling, and Robin Walker was talking about reading, and we had who was our wonderful speaker on listening?
Was it Christine Go?
Yes, Christine Go.
Okay.
And we had Mark Hancock to do pronunciation and speaking, and he's like, what? Obviously pronunciation and speaking go together. What's the angle, Gemma? Thankfully, as always, Mark Hancock finds a great angle to suit. But the other 3 were the kind of slightly more not unexplored, but there was slightly less information, obvious, blatant information on those angles, which made it a really rich, interesting session. All those, listening and reading and writing. But the speaking one was obviously a bit more obvious.
I think, Gemma, I'll need to send you an email so I can get access to some of those talks. That would be fantastic. Yeah,
because we have all the recordings from those conferences are available to purchase for a small donation. So they haven't gone away anywhere. They're still available to access.
I think if you remember, they're available for free on the IATEFL website. Yeah,
that's right.
So it's another reason to join PronSIG. So you get all of the access to the archive.
Yeah,
fantastic. All right, Gemma, I have another question for you. I'd like to know, what are you working on at the moment? What's your focus?
What am I working on? So we are the chapter that I mentioned. If we're talking about writing, for instance, the chapter that I mentioned that we have a small subcommittee within the PronSIG committee that's been working on this chapter, and it's called. I can give you the title. So the chapter is called Finding Your Tribe, How Membership of a Pronunciation-Focused Teacher Association Can Positively Impact Classroom Practices and Teachers' Professional Development. So that is now almost finished. It's been 2 years in the making, and we're just about there. It's going to be published next year by Cambridge University Press in an edited collection all about pronunciation success stories. So we're really, really excited. Everything we've learned from doing this project has just been, the cherry on the sundae, the icing on the cake. It's just really reinforced all of our experiences, the positive aspects that come from being part of PronSIG. So that is just in its final stages. It should be coming out, I think it's coming out early next year. What else am I doing? So
just a quick question on that. So you've contacted a lot of different PronSIG members, have you, to get some feedback from them as to how they've benefited from the group?
Yeah, so in 2023, we did a membership survey.
Mm-hmm.
And we designed the survey particularly to ask questions about, or give members the opportunity to share their stories with us. Stories about how being part of the SIG may have improved their confidence, their theoretical understanding of pronunciation and phonology, and their teaching repertoire. So we asked them questions about this to kind of measure their ability, their knowledge, their confidence from when they joined the SIG to later, to now. And gave them opportunity to share their stories. And so that's what we wrote up into this chapter. And so it's been a really interesting couple of years, putting editing the drafts and improving it, refining it for publication. So that's coming out soon.
Sorry, where did you say it's going to be published?
It's going to be published by Cambridge University Press. I don't know the title as yet of the book, but we'll share it all on the the PronSIG socials and with members. But yes, it's going to be on pronunciation success stories, and there will be multiple chapters from many different authors on positive news about the success that comes from pronunciation, explicit pronunciation instruction,
right,
and adjacent topics. So that's just about finished up. What else am I working on? Adam and I and the whole committee are always working behind the scenes on the next PronSIG events, because we do several a year. So we're busy trying to put the plans in place for our 40th anniversary celebrations coming up in 2026. And I'm also doing a bit of teaching for the Cullerville community, doing some teacher training for them, which is lovely. And what else am I doing, Adam? I can't even remember. We're working on, Adam and I are working on a great project together, aren't we?
Yes.
On, Adam, it's your baby. You can talk about it.
We're working on a project to introduce a competency framework for teaching pronunciation. Teaching competency frameworks have existed for quite a while now. The European Profile Grid is one example, and one of the earlier examples, in fact, working out how you can walk through the different stages of teacher development and identify where you are and assess what your next steps might be. However, there's never really been one for pronunciation, and even the CEFR's layers of assessment or can-do statements for speakers of users of English has had to radically change how it approached pronunciation, and that kind of reflects the changes in pedagogy over the last 20, 30 years through more effective research that's been bringing out a less native speaker, quote unquote, L1 user kind of focus or model, and bringing it much more down to communication, which gets into stuff about translanguaging as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit. So what we're working on is a competency framework that will deal with all of the different elements of teaching and in the relation that they have to pronunciation. So whether that's teacher development, teacher knowledge, use of digital resources or use of other resources, use of knowledge systems. So yeah, it's going to be something fun. I think we're all going to realise that we're not that far along it in certain areas, and that really shows the need for pronunciation to be an active part of people's professional development.
Is there a lot of consensus about what comprises effective pronunciation teaching?
I think now that we've got a lot of research from the likes of Levis and Baker and oh God, so many names that you can never know. Dowing and Monroe, so many names that you can't remember when you're put on the spot, or I can't anyway. We're really much clearer now about what quality pronunciation instruction involves. That it's something that requires knowledge. It's something that requires systematizing understandings and providing structures and frameworks as well as practice. And that without the structures and frameworks and knowledge, the practice doesn't really succeed in the way that it should. And that's kind of true of any area of language. And I think we've moved very much away from the communicative language teaching assumption that with speaking, pronunciation would improve. With more speaking practice, pronunciation would improve.
Okay.
And there are many reasons why that would not be the case. So in that sense, yes, there is a great deal of consensus. So it's not going to be anything that is lighting a fire, but it is going to be something that is going to be extremely useful and broadly agreed upon. So,
okay, I'm thinking, do you have to be particularly interested in pronunciation to be an effective teacher? If you're a little bit shy about it, I imagine that something like this competency framework would really provide support to teachers to gauge themselves and, okay, we check off the different areas, grammar, vocabulary, whatever, and to be able to ensure that they are effective pronunciation teachers, even without necessarily being specifically passionate about it. What do you think, Gemma, perhaps?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's, this was Adam's idea, and I've jumped on board along with our colleague, Kristina Czerwienkowa-Płestowa on the PronSIG committee. And I think we're all starting, as we kind of read our way into it, to see the value in this. Even from the point of view of having something so tangible as a framework, a visual with a framework to say, I'm here, but how do I get to here? Okay, so I need to do more on this. I need to learn more about that. Having something that's so simple and visual and tangible that you can measure yourself against. But I think what will be really interesting is for experienced teachers who maybe have been teaching 10, 20, 30 years. They may also look at something like this and realize, hang on, we're actually quite far down the bottom end. We don't know about this. We haven't tried this. We don't feel confident or comfortable doing this. Why is this the case? And how can I improve that? Because I think confidence really is so integral to what we do. And it's probably the reason why so many people don't teach pronunciation explicitly. Either they don't know, or they're aware that they don't know, and therefore they just don't want to go there, because that was certainly my experience.
And I was thinking of exactly that thing as well, Gemma. Everyone that I can think of who doesn't have what would be termed a standard Southern British English accent in my context, or a general American accent, has been really hesitant and really unconfident about dealing with pronunciation in the classroom. And I think this framework will really blow that myth out of the water and give people confidence to start whatever their accent, because all accents are accented, or there is no such thing as a neutral accent, and the idea that you need a specific accent in order to teach or to engage with pronunciation, the idea that you need to use a computer recording of a word as a citation form rather than your own voice because your accent isn't somehow acceptable, all of that will be kind of taken away, and this framework will make visible the things that actually are important. And I think surfacing that there's been a great deal of lack of knowledge, which has caused this lack of engagement. So yeah.
And what's nuts is how long it's taken for this to come about. Because I mean, even, I remember attending conferences maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, and that was still prevailing. You had to do, if you were teaching pronunciation, you had to do so with one of these accents. And I remember attending a session, I will not say the name of the presenter, but a well-known presenter who presented using, standard RP sounds. And when I went up as a very novice but eager to learn pronunciation teacher and said to him, do you have any advice for me? What should I do? And they took their RP sounds off the wall, turned it over to the other side, which was the general American sounds. They said, just teach these instead. I was like, oh, really? That's your advice? Just swap to a different accent model that's also not your own? that's debilitating. You know, I want to know what I can do using my own voice that will still be helpful.
Yeah.
The irony is that their chart is the single point of contact that most teachers do have with pronunciation.
Yes.
And yet 2/3 of what pronunciation is, at least 2/3, is kind of restricted to one tiny corner in the top right with the little square with the arrows showing and the stress markers.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
And it's crazy to me that is how pronunciation is perceived and projected broadly within the sector.
And of course, it's based on the RP accent, and only about 3 or 4% of the British population speak with an RP accent or something thereabouts.
Even less nowadays.
Even less,
yeah, about 2% nowadays.
It's also had a profound impact on pronunciation teaching in Australia and representation of Australian English sounds. That's an interesting developing area.
I remember seeing an Australian teaching publication, and it was using RP. I was like, how? And the other side of the world from us, are they still using RP as the model? It's just baffling.
I was just thinking the other day, how do I map the word idea? Because in a sort of southern British accent, it might be idea, but there's like an idea, this sort of, diphthong that we have at the end of it, but it's just not there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Adam, I have another question for you. Well, you mentioned as we were discussing the recording of the podcast before the recording of the episode, the translanguaging, which you've now mentioned a couple of times as well, is awesome. So what is it and why is it awesome?
Get that in there.
Yeah.
It really, I'll give you a little bit of background. While I was doing my master's in TESOL, one of the courses that I took was World Englishes. And the fascinating thing about it was that one of the tutors was an expert on translingual practices or translanguaging, because she'd studied under Kanagaraja, who is one of the key figures in translingual practice. So that was my introduction to it. And at the time, I'd still been struggling with the idea of, how do you cope with all these different accents that might not be mutually intelligible to each other? And there'd been various efforts to kind of square this circle. And this actually, translanguaging just blows that out of the water completely and goes, what the hell are you talking about? Language is practice. Language is communication, first and foremost. We divide languages into all these different segments. This one's English, this one's French, all of these different divisions between languages, which when you go back to, the old kind of like mythical narrative of like each valley would have a slightly different language, and it would kind of blur along with the distinctions. What you get when you start enumerating different varieties of English within World Englishes is you get this kind of multiplicity of forms, this kind of glossodiversity, as it's called, where this variety says that word with that meaning, and that meaning has another word in another variety, and all of these things. Fine, the whole work by Kacheru on the way in which the inner circle, the outer circle, and the expanding circle of different influences on English through their local context and all of that, that's fine. But translanguaging cuts through that and says, actually, why are you trying to enumerate all of these different varieties? You can get down to subcultural levels and even to the household level of language use and enumerate it there. Because we all have particular words within our family household that we would use and no one else would know. And so instead, there's something which is look at the variety of meaning that people construct when they communicate, and that meanings are context dependent. Meanings are based on the situation in which you're using that language. And if you take that approach, then suddenly what we're doing as speakers and learners and users of a language are exploring meanings instead. And meanings can come with many different forms. The same meaning can come with many different forms, but that's not the focus. Your focus is on communication, that your focus is on co-constructing understanding, the fact that you're an intersubjective agent within a communication setting when you've got that competency. And this kind of links into sort of like other approaches to communication, such as intercultural communicative competence as well. You know, those things that recognize there is no neutral variety, there is no standard which is everyone else must serve, that actually what happens with language is that you're co-constructing that through an effort at genuine communication with another interlocutor, and that generates vocabularies that are useful to you in that moment, and that applies and uses vocabularies that are useful to you in that moment. There's a classic example in one of the example texts of two people using English as a contact language, and someone's bought some cheese and it's gone bad and it's like exploded kind of thing, and he doesn't know that word, and they're on the phone together, and it's like, and the guy says it is blowing, and what he kind of means is blowing up kind of thing, but then they pick on that word and they keep using it because that's the word that is helping them to communicate, and they have coined that, they have created that for that use, that meaning, and that's what translingual practice is about. And it gives, when Garaja talks about it, it really gives a foundation to it. There's a philosophical depth as well, which I think is conceptually missing from some of the other authors, and allows it to be considered as a form of phenomenology, really, a form of the way in which we understand the world through our use and actions within it. So it's a really good place to be, and it takes away all of the prejudice around accent as part of that.
So it sounds like it would embrace limited knowledge as well. And in that example that you gave, where the student didn't know the word explode, you know, that it says it doesn't matter. You'll work it out along the way. So I guess if you're on board with it as a student or as a communicator, then it would be quite liberating in a sense, because you don't have this idea you must know everything about the language and all the possible vocabulary possibilities before you enter the conversation. You will have tools to manage it as you go along.
Exactly, and it goes as far as, it's been part of what has redefined what bilingual means as well. Bilingual used to be that you were perfect at another language. You had that kind of C2 level, C1 level competence at it. Whereas now, if someone's able to communicate in another language, then they're classified as bilingual, and that kind of, and they're multilingual, and that kind of shift in the emphasis from kind of perfection of some kind of set of knowledge to what you co-construct and what you use through process is really the shift. I mean, in a nutshell, translanguaging is a shift from knowledge to process. Okay. And I think we're seeing that in lots of different areas of kind of education as well. So it kind of fits that vibe.
Okay. So would you describe it as a classroom practice or a discipline within the field?
That's the other thing that it is. If you adopt that kind of approach, then when you come across a situation where learners are being creative users and generators of language, then you can, as a professional teacher, you can then bring that into whatever you're teaching and help learners to understand something else, and take that learning and relate it to whatever is the structure or the forms that you're trying to help the learners to adopt and inculcate themselves with. And that word of inculcation as well, that's a nice one that really focuses on the idea of the process, that it's not just something to be learned in a moment or anything like that. So there are other elements to translingual practice, such as mediation, which are now really written into core curriculums. For example, in Spain, that's part of their national exams in English, to be able to mediate like information from Spanish into English for a foreign audience, for example, a non-Spanish speaking audience. So those kinds of things. You look at a menu even, you're never going to know how to explain all of the words on a well-written menu. So you have to adopt that kind of use of metaphor, use of flexible use of language that allows you to get around what you've got. And it also encourages you to use all of your linguistic resources from whatever language you have in order to achieve that communication. And so, it's maybe the very start of languages as a concept kind of merging into something more like communication.
Yeah, sure. Definitely contrasts with the sort of school you're studying for a particular exam or something like that, and there's X, Y, and Z material that's going to be in the exam, and that's a finite amount of things that you need to know to be X good at this language or something like that. So we're looking at skills to be able to remain flexible and open for everything.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
And that, I should have said as well, that leads into intelligibility, or leans into intelligibility as an idea as well. And it really provides a nice grounding for that as well. But
Yeah, fantastic.
intelligibility is something which is co-constructed also,
Absolutely,
and what might be intelligible for a regional community speaking English as a contact language might not be intelligible for a pan, what's the word? Intercontinental community speaking.
Absolutely.
Speaking that same contact language. So
yeah. I'm here in Germany, and a lot of Germans who speak English. They've been listening to a lot of British people for a long time, so they're quite used to sort of, I say British, they say British, but they mean the sort of Southern standard English accent. And other Germans who speak English as well. And we're starting to get more and more people from India working over here. And of course, they've a lot of Indians have been learning English or started learning at a very young age, and they're like, really, really struggle. We're not used to this, and I think it's challenging for them to manage that process.
And I think it also really brings back these situations about familiarity is this key variable. People say, I can't understand you, you are the problem, when actually the listener has that, talking about this co-construction of communication and understanding, the listener has such a big role to play in being intelligible, being understood, understanding a conversation, having to put that effort in to listen and to understand and be familiar. And realize that they are 50% of that exchange.
Yeah.
This is something that certainly I hear all the time in Scotland with students who are not familiar with Scottish speakers, and they say they're speaking bad English, they're speaking poorly, when of course it is. It's simply that they're speaking in a local variety. They're speaking in Scots or Scottish English, and these listeners are just not familiar. They're not used to it, and also they don't expect it. So I think the role of familiarity is so integral to that too, and making meaning.
I think, Gemma, you're absolutely right. And you, as you said, they're speaking, and I was like, differently, and difference is part of what is really part of our job as language learner teachers to help learners embrace and manage.
Yeah.
And hopefully more than tolerate, but be able to engage with. So part of the pronunciation competencies that are emerging and that will be part of this framework are the abilities for teachers to help students to develop those competencies to be able to engage and know how to adapt and how to support communication in interactions where it's a struggle, where the intelligibility factor is not there in as fully as it might be to ease communication. So how to engage with someone who is a more accented speaker, which is making that more difficult to in such a way that it is making it more difficult to understand. Or how to engage with someone and be able to make your point very clearly in an important situation to get your message across in a way which is going to be communicated without any kind of uncertainty. So all of those kinds of skills are things that we can. They are skills, they're things that we can help students to develop in class, rather than pointing at a sound on the chart and say which we've experienced, haven't we, Gemma? It's been quite terrifying.
Yes.
So, Gemma, I would like to ask you as well, what are you doing to support learners with the Scottish accent and understanding and comprehension where you are?
Trying to raise awareness, first of all, and through raising awareness, raising curiosity and tolerance. Because there's again, students have, I say students in a kind of blanket generalization. I don't mean everyone, of course. Many students, not all, they, I work in a university. My students are mainly postgrads, so they're doing a master's or a PhD. They may not have chosen to come here. They may have, it's because they personally wanted to come to Scotland, but because this is the place with the best offer of education for them, or maybe a supervisor back home in their home university has a link to my university. So there's all sorts of reasons which bring students here. And if they are coming here for, not because they want to come to Scotland, just for the educational opportunity of doing this qualification, often they may not have an understanding of the linguistic environment that Scotland is, the languages that exist here, the indigenous languages, the official languages that exist here. And so they often arrive, they've done a lot of work on their English, they have to get at least an IELTS 6.5 to come through customs, come through the airport, enter the country and begin their life here, their studies. And as soon as they arrive, they touch down, and from the beginning of their arrival, they are struggling to understand, because this is an unusual form of language they haven't heard before, they've got little familiarity with. And they often, because this is associated with anxiety and fear, they often develop negative associations with it. They don't want to talk to local people because they're worried they're going to have this experience again, not understanding, which can be really embarrassing. And it does kind of inhibit, and I say this for myself as a language learner as well. I've been in those circumstances, and it's not fun. You want to be able to, especially if you spent years learning, you want to be able to have these fluent exchanges and get the information that you need. So I'm often dealing with students who have really negative associations with the local speakers, and trying to help them to understand that what they're hearing is not necessarily English. They're hearing speakers across a spectrum of languages that exist here, between Scottish English and Scots, which are two separate and distinct languages with a shared ancestor. So trying to raise their awareness of that, and also on the decoding side of things, helping them to hear, or not even hear, try and identify what's being said to them. And of course, as in all Englishes, certainly in all L1 English users, there's a lot of difficulty and challenge in decoding unstressed words, function words, all of these little grammar words, pronouns, articles, prepositions. They become so reduced, they become connected to other words. So in Scotland, like in all of these other English-speaking countries, students are trying to, drag out any kind of understanding that they can from hearing these words and in these encounters. And that's obviously a big part of what we do. And then extending that into understanding the use of words which are not English, that are part of the Scottish English community. So yes, raising awareness, raising tolerancy, doing that listening, decoding to help them understand why there's a problem, and then giving them the practice and hopefully a bit of confidence.
Absolutely. I imagine that students have been very positive about what they've got out of the course as well.
I think it opens their eyes a little bit as to what's really going on when they're having these exchanges, that it's not just that they can't understand. They think, I'm a bad listener, they're a bad speaker. They start to meet in the middle.
Yeah. And of course, a lot of the features of Scottish English, the connected speech features, are in a lot of varieties of
all of these varieties, yeah. And that's something that we have to remind them. This is not just a hear problem. This is something that extends to so many speech communities.
That's it, yeah. All right, guys, I think we might come to an end of the podcast episode for now. Adam, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I mean, I think this has been great. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too.
I think the only thing I want to say is just keep working on pronunciation. It's such an integral part of everything to do with language, and learn to love it. Yeah.
All right.
And I think when we start learning, we do fall in love with it a bit. Once you get over that initial hurdle, it happens.
What did you say before, Adam? It was the vehicle, or what was the metaphor that you gave?
The beating heart.
The beating heart. Yeah.
Robin Walker's metaphor.
Right. Okay.
Borrowed it. So definitely give him credit there.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much to the both of you. I look forward to chatting to you soon, and thanks to our listeners. Hopefully,
thanks a million.
See you next time.
Mike.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.